Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Let your arms go heavy, your breath slow. And as you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing what time it is, where you are, and what city or village you're listening from. It's love to know. And if you'd like more quiet stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe so they gently appear when you need them most. Now, let's begin. A bell tolls faintly in the distance, its sound softened by a blanket of night air. The wind carries it unevenly, stretching the note, making it feel more like a memory than a present call. Lanterns flicker along narrow alleys, their glow struggling against a haze of smoke that drifts low across the streets. You hear footsteps on stone, slow and heavy, fading quickly into silence. The air tastes sharp, tinged with ash, and you feel the weight of dampness pressing against your skin. This is China in the 19th century, a land vast and ancient, yet trembling under new pressures. These were the years when opium crept into daily life, silent and corrosive, when smoke curled not only from hearths, but from pipes that weakened whole families. You don't need to follow every word. Just let the images drift softly like fog over the river. The scent of burning opium lingers in crowded rooms, sweet and heavy, filling lungs until even the air itself feels slower. Outside, frost grips the tiles of rooftops, crunches faintly under hurried steps, while inside, candles flicker dimly against walls stained with soot. The empire was mighty, the Qing dynasty still vast in name. Yet shadows gathered quietly at its edges. Merchants carried the drug through harbors, ships unloading at dusk, their holds filled with cargo that would reshape lives. Families who once lived on rice and tea found themselves bound instead to smoke and longing. Nights dissolving in a haze that blurred both hunger and hope. You don't have to hold on to every detail. Just let these impressions drift past, soft and slow. It's like ash carried by wind. A dynasty that once stretched unbroken over centuries now faced an unseen enemy. Not in armies alone, but in cravings that weakened from within. The streets carried both the sound of commerce and the silence of decline, the two blending into a rhythm that could not be ignored. Candles flickered, frost creaked, the smell of smoke hung heavier each season. And as you stand in that quiet haze, listening to the distant toll of bells, noticing the faint glow of lanterns fighting through the mist, you may find yourself wondering, how did an empire so vast, so deeply rooted, begin to unravel under the weight of something as small as smoke? Asterisk, you hear it before you see it, the slow lap of waves against wooden holes, the creak of ropes drawn tight, the call of sailors muffled in mist. The harbor of Canton breathes like a living thing, filled with movement, yet softened by the haze of dawn. The air tastes of salt, of damp bamboo, of incense that drifts from temple steps nearby. And in that air, if you pause long enough, you notice something else, a faint sweetness, heavy and strange, the smell of smoke rising from hidden pipes. It begins quietly. Craters unload bales of cloth, crates of tea, jars of porcelain, tea, there. Voices rise and fall, a rhythm carried by the river. But behind the open stalls and warehouses, in rooms where shutters are drawn, another trade moves slowly. Chests are opened, not filled with silk or spice, but with brown resin pressed into cakes, wrapped carefully, passed hand to hand. The chests do not clang like porcelain. They do not rustle like silk. Rest heavy, quiet, almost secret. Pause. Here. Picture yourself standing at the edge of the quay. The mist thickens, and a ship looms above you, its hull black, its sails furled. On deck, men move quickly, their breath clouding, their boots thudding against wood. You hear the hiss of lanterns being lit, the low hum of voices in languages that blur together, and faintly drifting through it all. You sense that sweetness again. Smoke that does not belong to the sea. Opium was not born here. It traveled across seas, grown in distant fields, carried in ships that traced the currents from India to China. For centuries, it had been a medicine, measured in drops, used to dull pain, to quiet coughing, to steady the body against fever. But here, in Canton's crowded alleys, it was no longer medicine. It was leisure, escape, habit. Pipes hissed softly in tea houses, their bowls glowing faintly in darkness, their smoke curling into rafters. Men leaned back, their eyes heavy, their voices slowing to murmurs. And so, the empire's first entanglement with opium did not roar, it whispered. It slipped into homes, into taverns, into barracks. It mingled with tea, with wine, with stories told at dusk. It did not arrive as invasion, but as invitation, a softness that dulled edges of hunger and hardship. Pause again. You are sitting now inside one of those tea houses. The air is thick with incense, its sweetness mixed with something sharper. A pipe hisses nearby, the glow of its bowl like an ember in the shadows. You hear laughter, low, slow, almost dreamlike. Shadows sway against bamboo walls. Outside, the fog presses close against the windows, as though the world beyond has grown distant. The Qing Empire was vast then, its reach stretching across mountains, rivers, deserts. Its rulers believed themselves secure, its people bound by centuries of order, by the rhythm of Confucian duty and agricultural life. And yet, in corners like these, another rhythm began to beat. One not of harvest or prayer, but of smoke and dream. A pipe passed hand to hand. A night stretched longer than it should. A man wakened weaker than he had been the day before. This was how empires weaken, not with sudden collapse, but with small fractures, repeated quietly until walls no longer hold. You don't have to remember each detail, each name, each place. It's enough to drift with the sound of the waves, the hiss of pipes, the softness of voices in smoke-filled rooms. Opium seeped into Canton not only through pleasure, but through trade. Foreign merchants, hungry for China's tea and silk, found their coins unwelcome. Silver drained from their hands, leaving them desperate for balance. And so they brought opium instead, a product cheap where it was grown, yet treasured where it was smoked. The trade was not legal, not sanctioned, but profit is patient. Bribes were paid, guards were persuaded, shipments slipped through harbors at night. Pause once more. Picture small boats moving quietly along the Pearl River. Their oars dip silently, their cargo hidden beneath cloth. Canes are hooded, their light faint. The water ripples softly, carrying the boats toward shadowed docks. Men step ashore quickly, their voices low. Chests are carried inside warehouses, the doors closing fast, leaving only silence behind. The empire's officials knew. They wrote reports, sent warnings, ordered bans. Edicts were posted forbidding the trade, punishing those caught with pipes or resin. But the bans faltered. Corruption was steady, profit heavier than law. And so, opium spread further, from harbors to towns, from soldiers to scholars, from merchants to mandarins. The smoke lingered. It hung in homes where children watched fathers sink into stillness. It clouded barracks where soldiers should have stood firm. It curled through offices where officials nodded heavy-eyed over their duties. It was not sudden, but it was steady, and the empire that seemed eternal began to feel its weight. Pause again. Imagine a scholar's desk. Parchment lies scattered. Brushes rest in ink. A candle burns low. But the scholar himself leans back, a pipe in his hand, smoke drifting above him. His eyes close, his breath slows. The candle flickers lower, wax dripping steadily, and the silence of the room thickens. Work waits, decisions wait, but time drifts past unnoticed. If you're still listening, notice how time itself feels slower now. The smoke curls, the fog folds, the silence presses. You don't need to follow every moment of history. Just let it pass like mist, like waves against stone. Opium was not yet a war, not yet a crisis. It was simply a presence, sweet-smelling, softly glowing, endlessly patient. The harbor of Canton carried porcelain and silk, yes, but hidden within its warehouses, within its tea houses, within its homes. Another cargo grew heavier. A cargo not counted in crates, but in lungs, in minds, in lives that drifted away. And you were left with a reflection, lingering like smoke against rafters in those first quiet nights in Canton. Did anyone sense that this sweetness, this stillness, this silence was the beginning of a shadow that would stretch across the empire itself? Asterisk, you hear the hush of a pipe before you see its glow, a faint hiss, the sound of burning resin. Then the sweetness drifts across the room, heavy and strange, curling through the air until it clings to hair, to cloth, to the very walls. What began in harbors and tea houses did not stay there. It spread quietly, step by step, from the waterfront into the rhythm of daily life across the empire. Pause here. Imagine walking through a narrow alley in Canton. Lanterns hang faintly above, their light dulled by haze. The smell of rice cooking drifts from one door, of fish from another. But mingled with it now is that other scent, sweet, smoky, thick. You pass a doorway and glimpse a man reclined on a mat, his pipe resting between fingers, his eyes half closed. Around him, silence gathers, broken only by the hiss of the bowl as he draws again. At first, it was curiosity. A soldier, weary from marches, sought escape. A merchant, flush with profit, sought leisure. A scholar, burdened with study, sought rest. His pipes were shared among friends, smoked at festivals, passed at celebrations. It dulled pain, smoothed hunger, slowed time. What harm, they thought, in an evening softened by smoke? But the evenings became habits. Habits became need. And soon, in villages and cities alike, the hiss of pipes joined the crackle of cooking fires, the murmur of prayers, the shuffle of markets. The empire's silence deepened, its air thickened, its rhythm slowed. Pause again. Picture a home in the countryside. The fields outside are bare in winter, the air cold, the earth hard. Inside, a family gathers around a small fire. The father reaches for his pipe, lights it carefully, draws deeply. The smoke curls upward, mixing with the steam of rice, with the smell of damp straw. The children watch, their eyes wide, their faces pale. The fire crackles faintly, the pipe hisses softly, and silence grows. The Qing government saw the spread, and edicts grew sharper. Laws for bad cultivation, for bad sale, for bad use. Officials ordered arrests, ordered destruction of pipes, ordered searches of homes. Yet, for every chest seized, two more slipped through. For every pipe broken, another was carved. For every bribe refused, another was accepted. The empire was vast, the demand steady, the profit irresistible. And so, opium flowed through rivers and roads, hidden in cargo, carried by merchants, welcomed by those who sought its comfort. From harbors to inland towns, from soldiers to scholars, it spread like smoke in still air, invisible until it was everywhere. Pause once more. Imagine a caravan crossing a mountain pass. Snow drifts along the trail. The wind howls through the pines. Its horses snort, their breath clouding in the cold. Beneath the tarps, hidden among sacks of tea and grain, lie small bundles, each wrapped carefully, each carrying the resin that would fill pipes far away. The men walk in silence, their footsteps crunching snow, their eyes fixed ahead. The mountains echo, only with wind, but within their cargo. Another silence waits. If you're still listening, notice how time slows again. The rhythm of footsteps, the hiss of pipes, the drift of smoke stretches longer, heavier. You don't need to hold each fact. Let them pass like shadows in fog, like waves against stone. By the early 19th century, the scale had grown. Vast, millions smoked, silver drained from the empire, corruption deepened. Farmers abandoned fields, soldiers neglected drills, scholars missed duties. A single habit spread into every corner of life, pulling threads loose one by one until the fabric of the empire began to fray. But in homes, in tea houses, in barracks, it was not silver or fabric. They saw only the pipe, only the sweet smoke, only the brief relief. Pause again. Picture a soldier in his barrack, the night cold, his breath clouding in the air. He lies back on his mat, the pipe glowing at his lips, his armor set aside, his sword leaning in the corner. His comrades do the same, their breaths slow, their laughter sluggish. Outside, the campfires sputter, the wind howls, but inside, silence grows heavy and unbroken. Officials wrote of this silence. Reports spoke of soldiers too weak to march, farmers too frail to plow, clerks too distracted to write. The empire's strength was not lost in battle, but in breath, each one slower, each one weaker, each one given to smoke. And yet, within the haze, life continued. Children still played in courtyards, markets still bustled, festivals still filled streets. The smoke did not erase joy. It dulled it, softened it, stretched it thin. Like fog over the river, it did not stop the current, but it hid the banks, blurred the distance, made direction uncertain. Pause once more. Imagine yourself walking through a festival. Lanterns glow red above, drums beat faintly, voices rise in song. But in shadowed corners, men recline with pipes, their laughter sluggish, their eyes heavy. The drums fade in their ears, the lanterns blur in their sight. The songs drift away. Around them, the festival roars, but within them, silence grows, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like smoke against rafters. Did those who smoked in those first evenings sense that their breath was being borrowed, that the silence they welcomed into their homes would, in time, echo across the empire itself? Asterisk, you hear it again, the faint hiss of a pipe, the sweetness drifting through air too heavy for dawn. What began as scattered embers in Canton's harbor now glows across the empire. Its smoke curling into villages, towns, palaces. The empire breathes it in, slow, steady, unaware that each breath carries a weight heavier than frost. Pause here. Imagine a quiet courtyard in Beijing. Snow settled softly on stone tiles, muffling footsteps, coating rooftops in white. Inside, an official sits at his desk. Scrolls spread before him. A candle burns, wax dripping steadily. But his hand does not move. The brush lies idle. The ink dries. Beside him, a pipe glows faintly, smoke curling upward into rafters. His eyes close, his breath slows, the silence thickens. The empire's business waits, but time drifts past unnoticed. This was how opium hollowed, not in sudden collapse, but in stillness. Work delayed, duties neglected, strength weakened. A farmer who smoked too long could not plow his field at dawn. A soldier who lingered with his pipe could not march at call. An official who nodded heavy-eyed could not enforce edicts against corruption. The empire's walls remained standing, but within them, silence spread. And so, the foundation cracked. Slowly, silver drained from the treasury, flowing outward in trade for smoke. Fields yielded less as hands faltered. Armies stood weaker, their swords bright, but their arms frail. Courts issued decrees against opium, but their words were softened by officials themselves, caught in haze. What had begun as pleasure had become dependence. Independence became fragility. Pause again. Picture a barrack at night. Armor rests against the wall. Swords gleam faintly in candlelight. But the men do not sharpen blades, do not march drills. They lie back on mats, their pipes glowing, their voices low, their laughter sluggish. The air is heavy with smoke, the silence thicker than discipline. Outside, the frost crunches under. Watchmen's feet, but inside. The empire's strength dissolves quietly. If you're still listening, notice how slowly time flows now. The hiss of pipes, the drift of smoke, the silence of duty delayed. You don't need to hold each fact. Let them slip past like fog along the river, like wax dripping from a candle. The emperors knew. Reports reached the forbidden city. Warnings, written in sharp brushstrokes. Officials begged for stronger bans, for tighter control. Yet the palace itself was not free. Courtiers smoked, guards smoked. Even some within the inner chambers could not resist the glow of the pipe. How do you ban what sits at your own table? How do you fight what already rests in your own breath? Edicts came, harsh in word, but weak in enforcement. Those who enforced them often smoked themselves. Those who punished others often took bribes. The cycle deepened, the silence thickened, the smoke spread further. An empire, vast and proud, found itself unable to command its own breath. Pause once more. Imagine standing in the forbidden city at night. Lanterns glow faintly, casting long shadows across red walls and golden roofs. Snow falls quietly, softening stone. From within chambers, you see light flicker, smell incense, and something else, sweeter, heavier. The pipe glows faintly. No official reclines, his head heavy, his duty postponed. The silence of the palace matches the silence of tenements far away. The hollowing was not only physical, not only economic, it was spiritual. Confucian duty, the foundation of governance, rested on discipline, on responsibility, on service to family and state. But opium dulled responsibility, softened discipline, made silence seem easier than duty. Scholars who should have written essays smoked instead. Fathers who should have guided sons lay still instead. Generals who should have prepared armies dreamed instead. The empire's moral order weakened, its heartbeat slowed. Pause again. Picture a scholar's study. Books line the shelves, scrolls rest on tables, casting light across inkstones. But the scholar himself lies back, smoke drifting above him, his eyes closed. The books remain unread, the ink unused, the silence growing heavier with each moment. Outside, snow falls quietly, but inside, the silence is heavier still. And so, opium was no longer just a presence in Canton. It was a presence in homes, in palaces, in hearts. Its smoke blurred the lines between rich and poor, soldier and scholar, ruler and ruled. All breathed the same sweetness, all sank into the same stillness. The empire, once vast and certain, began to feel uncertain, its strength hollowed not by foreign armies yet, but by its own breath. If you're still listening, notice how the rhythm lingers. Each image stretches, each silence deepens. You don't have to recall each report, each edict. Let them drift like smoke through rafters, light, mist over rivers. The empire's decline did not yet roar, but the quiet was louder than it seemed. Silver drained, armies weakened, duties neglected. Pipes glowed in shadows, smoke curled into rafters. Silence settled across the land. What looked like stillness was in truth erosion. What looked like leisure was in truth fragility. Pause once more. You stand now in a village at dusk. Children chase each other in frost, their laughter sharp and clear. Mothers stir pots of rice. The steam rising into cold air. But in one corner, a man reclines with his pipe, smoke curling above him. His eyes are heavy, his breath slow. The children's laughter fades in his ears. The mother's voice drifts past. Around him, life moves, but within him, silence grows, and you are left with a reflection that drifts softly like smoke into rafters when the empire inhaled its first sweet breaths. Did it know that each exhale would leave it weaker? That silence, heavier than any army, was already hollowing the foundations beneath its throne. The palace at Beijing did not escape the winter silence. Snow fell across red walls, muffling footsteps, coating roofs with pale brightness. Lanterns glowed faintly behind golden gates, their halos dulled by fog. Yet within those walls, where the order was meant to reign, another silence spread. The silence of pipes hissing softly, of smoke curling into rafters, of duty postponed in haze. A pause here. Imagine standing at the Meridian Gate. Guards hold their spears steady, their armor gleaming in lamplight, their breath clouds in the air, their eyes sharp. Yet when the shifts end, when they return to their quarters, the spears lean in corners, and their hands reach instead for pipes. The glow is faint, the hiss steady, the silence deeper than discipline. The empire's protectors, meant to stand firm, sink into stillness instead. Opium had entered the forbidden city by the same paths it entered villages and harbors, quietly, persistently, carried in secret, welcomed in shadow. At first, it was servants and soldiers, men who carried burdens and sought to escape. Then it was scribes, weary from endless copying, their brushes dulling, their minds slowed. Then, whispers say, it was courtiers, officials of rank, men with power, who found the sweetness too heavy to refuse. And so, smoke rose not only from tea houses, but from chambers within the red walls themselves. And so, the very heart of the empire, the palace meant to embody order, discipline, and divine rule, was not free of the same weakness that hollowed its fields and barracks. Pause again. Picture a small chamber within the palace. 8. Its walls are painted with dragons, its lamps glow softly, its air heavy with incense. On a table lies a pipe, its bowl glowing faintly, smoke curling upward into silence. An official reclines, his robe loose, his head heavy. Scrolls lie beside him unopened, their seals unbroken. The silence deepens, the smoke lingers, and the empire waits outside the door. If you're still listening, notice how slowly this image unfolds. The hiss of the pipe, the stillness of the chamber, the weight of silence. You don't need to hold every name, every title. Just let the sound and shadow drift like mist across palace walls. The emperors were not blind. Reports reached them of corruption, of soldiers weakened, of officials distracted. They issued edicts condemning the use, punishing those caught. Yet even as punishments grew sharper, the smoke thickened. Those who enforced the bans sometimes smoked themselves. Those who carried edicts sometimes delayed them within the walls of the forbidden city. Whispers grew that even courtiers closest to the throne had pipes hidden in their chambers. Pause. Once more. Imagine an emperor walking through a palace corridor at night. Lanterns swing, shadows stretch along carved pillars. He smells incense drifting faintly, and beneath it, another scent, sweeter, heavier. A door closes quickly. A guard bows deeply. Silence follows. The emperor frowns, but walks on. The silence lingers, unbroken. The danger was not only in the weakness of the body, but in weakness of the state. An official who smoked too heavily could not judge disputes, could not read petitions, could not resist bribes. A soldier, dulled by smoke, could not guard gates, could not march quickly, could not stand in battle. A courtier who delayed duty left power unbalanced, left corruption unchecked. Smoke blurred not only minds, but the very order of governance. And so, the empire's foundation cracked further, not by foreign armies yet, not by famine yet, but by the stillness that spread through its palace halls. Pause again. Picture yourself walking through the hall of supreme harmony. The chamber's vast, its ceilings painted, its throne raised high, yet it stands empty. The silence is deep, the shadows long. In side chambers, smoke curls, pipes hiss, men recline. The throne waits, but the silence holds it. If you're still listening, notice how the palace feels slower now. Its silence deeper, its halls longer. You don't need to follow each corridor, each chamber. Let them stretch like dreams, okay? Like shadows you drift through. The Qing court had faced storms before. Invasions, famines, rebellions, okay? Its strength had always been discipline. The Confucian duty that bound ruler to subject, father to son, soldier to command. But opium dulled that discipline. It blurred duty, softened resolve, and turned silence into habit. It was not only men who smoked, it was the empire itself. And still, outside the palace, ships gathered. Foreign merchants waited in harbors. Their chests heavy with resin. Silver drained steadily. Bribes moved silently, and pipes glowed across villages and cities. The palace, meant to be the last stronghold of discipline, instead mirrored the weakness of the land it ruled. Pause once more. Imagine standing outside the palace walls. The fog presses close, muffling sound. You look up at the golden roofs, their tiles glistening faintly with frost. Behind them, lanterns glow dim. Smoke drifts upward, unseen. You cannot hear voices. You cannot see duty. Only silence. And you are left with a reflection that drifts softly. Light smoke curling above the eaves when the empire's palace itself inhaled. When its halls filled with the same sweetness that dulled its villages, how could its throne remain steady against the storms that waited just beyond its gates? Asterisk, the palace was meant to embody balance, Confucian, duty carved in stone, discipline arranged in ceremony. Each courtyard measured, each corridor aligned, each chamber ordered to reflect harmony between heaven and earth. But as smoke curled through its walls, harmony blurred into haze. The rhythm of ritual slowed, the cadence of duty faltered, and silence folded heavier across its halls. Pause. Here, imagine a morning audience in the Forbidden City. The emperor sits upon the throne, attendants arranged in rows, officials bowing in ritual order. Their robes sweep the floor, their voices rise in rehearsed tones. Yet, if you look closely, you see eyes dim, lids heavy. You notice coughs softened into sleeves, hands trembling faintly. Some speak slowly, their words wandering. The emperor listens, but behind their voices lies a silence thicker than ceremony, deeper than discipline. Opium did not respect rank. The same pipe smoked in a fisherman's hut could be found in a scholar's study, in a soldier's barrack, and now in a minister's chamber. Officials entrusted with the empire's business sought relief in its sweetness. They said it steadied the mind, softened the burden, calmed the nerves, but the sweetness carried weight. Tasks slowed, reports waited, decisions blurred. The empire's machinery, meant to turn steadily, began to grind in silence. And so, the corruption deepened. A bribe was easier to accept when eyes were heavy. A report was easier to ignore when smoke dulled the mind. Law was easier to bend when silence seemed more comforting than conflict. The palace, meant to resist the world's weakness, mirrored it instead. Pause again. Picture an official in his chamber. Scrolls lie stacked before him, their seals unbroken. He lights his pipe, inhales slowly, exhales a cloud that curls into painted rafters. His breath softens, his hand falls from the brush. The scrolls wait. The empire waits, but time drifts away. Outside, snow falls in silence, But inside, the silence is heavier still. If you're still listening, notice how slowly the palace breathes now. The hiss of pipes, the flicker of lamps, the shuffle of feet in corridors. You don't need to remember each title, each rank. Let them fade like shadows in mist. Rumors whispered that even within the inner court, pipes glowed. Servants carried them, hiding them within trays. Eunuchs, who managed the hidden rhythms of the palace, were said to indulge. Their loyalty dulled, their discipline softened. Some whispered that concubines themselves, isolated in endless chambers, turned to smoke to pass long hours. The palace, once sealed against the world, absorbed the world's weakness. Pause once more. Imagine walking through the inner court. Corridors stretch in silence. Doors close softly. Lanterns glow faintly. One chamber, a curl of smoke, drifts into the hall, sweet and heavy. A servant bows quickly, hides a pipe, moves on. The silence deepens. The haze lingers. The empire exhales slowly. The emperor issued bans again. Stronger punishments, harsh decrees, pipes seized, officials dismissed. Yet the bans fell into the same silence they sought to break. Tasked with enforcing them, smoked themselves. Those meant to punish corruption were corrupted themselves. Each edict, though sharp in brushstrokes, was dulled in smoke before it reached its mark. And so, the palace became a mirror of the empire. Ruled, its gates strong, its walls high, its roofs golden, but within its strength dulled, its silence heavy. Pause again. Picture the hall of supreme harmony again at dusk. Its vast chamber glows faintly in lamplight, but it is empty. The throne waits in silence. Inside halls, shadows flicker, pipes glow, smoke curls. The throne stands untouched, but silence reigns. If you're still listening, notice how time slows with each pause. The shadows stretch longer, the silence deepens, the palace grows heavier. You don't need to trace each law, each punishment. Let them drift like smoke above eaves. It's like snow melting on stone. The empire had faced weakness before, but never like this. Famines could be fed with grain. Rebellions could be crushed with armies. Invasions could be fought with walls and weapons. But smoke could not be fought with armies, nor with walls. It hollowed from within, softening discipline, dulling resolve, making silence seem easier than resistance. And so, courtiers, who should have stood firm, wavered. Ministers who should have resisted bent. Generals who should have prepared, delayed. The palace still stood, its walls bright, its rituals intact. But within, strength ebbed like a tide. Pause once more. You stand outside the palace at night. The roofs gleamed faintly with frost. Lanterns flicker against fog. You hear nothing. No shouts, no drums, no discipline. Only silence. And within that silence, you imagine the faint hiss of a pipe, the curl of smoke, the weight of stillness, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like mist across golden roofs when the court itself sank into smoke. When its voices blurred and its silence deepened, how could the empire stand steady against storms gathering beyond its gates? The forbidden city, vast and silent, seemed timeless from the outside. Golden roofs caught the pale winter sun. Red walls rose unbroken. Gates loomed heavy as mountains. To the people of the empire, the palace embodied strength, harmony, endurance. But within its halls, the emperor himself wrestled with a shadow he could not grasp. He saw the empire weakening, the treasury draining, the soldiers dulling. He heard the reports of pipes glowing in every village, of silver flowing out like water, of ministers themselves caught in haze. And he knew the sickness had reached his throne. Pause here. Imagine the emperor seated in his chamber. Before him lie reports, petitions from governors, warnings from commanders, edicts drafted by scribes. His brush hovers above the page, his hand steady, his eyes sharp. Yet, behind his chamber door, he knows what lingers. Courtiers reclined with pipes, eunuchs distracted in haze, soldiers guarding gates with breath slowed by smoke. Even here, in the palace meant to embody heaven's order, silence presses heavier than discipline. The emperors of the Qing dynasty tried again and again to ban opium. Edicts declared it poison. Officials were punished, traitors executed, pipes smashed in public. Words filled scrolls like fire, fierce and uncompromising. But fire on paper did not reach the haze in rooms, nor the glow in pipes. Each law weakened as it passed through hands already stained with smoke. And so, the emperor stood alone in a struggle that seemed endless. To forbid was necessary, but to forbid was impossible. To punish was right, but to punish was futile. His own ministers faltered, his own guards softened, his own household was not free of temptation. The empire itself seemed to inhale behind him, exhaling only silence. Pause again. Picture the emperor pacing at night. Lanterns glow faintly along the corridor. Snow drifts silently across the courtyards. He stops, listens, smells. Incense drifts faintly, and beneath it, another scent, heavier, sweeter. He frowns. He knows. He walks on, but the silence lingers. The haze deepens. If you're still listening, notice how heavy time feels here. Each step slow, each breath weighted, each silence stretched. You don't have to remember each edict, each punishment. Let them pass like footsteps vanishing in snow. The emperor's dilemma was more than law. It was faith. The mandate of heaven, which gave him rule, depended on harmony. Ruler just, subjects loyal, heaven satisfied. But how could harmony hold when duty blurred, when silence replaced service, when smoke dulled the very breath of the empire? He could not admit weakness without risking faith itself. And yet weakness spread openly, visible in every port, in every market, in every chamber. Pause once more. Imagine the hall of supreme harmony at dawn. The throne gleams faintly in the first light. The hall is vast, silent. The emperor mounts the steps, sits, waits. Courtiers enter, their robes sweeping stone, their voices murmuring reports. Yet, behind their words, their eyes are heavy, their hands tremble. The emperor hears more silence than speech. He raises his brush, signs an edict, but the silence deepens. Attempts were made to purge the court. Officials dismissed, generals punished, servants replaced. Some were executed, their names struck from records. Yet, for each dismissed, another faltered. For each punished, another bribed. Smoke crept back through corridors, curled beneath doors, lingered in rafters. The emperor could not strike what was everywhere, and so he faced the truth in silence, that the empire's greatest enemy did not march at its gates, but breathe within its lungs. Pause again. Picture yourself standing at the palace gate at dusk. Outside, the city bustles faintly, carts rolling, voices rising. Inside, silence presses heavy. You cannot hear duty, cannot see discipline. Only the glow of lamps, the slow tread of guards, the faint hiss of a pipe somewhere beyond. If you're still listening, notice how the palace itself feels slower, its silence heavier, its halls longer. You don't need to hold each decree, each reform. Let them drift like smoke above rooftops, like mist over rivers. The emperor could not rid his court of opium, but he could not ignore it either. His rule was meant to embody control, but control slipped with every breath. His throne was meant to embody strength, but strength dulled with every pipe. He wrote edicts with fierce brushstrokes, but even as the ink dried, smoke curled nearby. Patient, unbroken. And so, the emperor sat upon his throne, but the throne itself rested on silence. The empire's foundations cracked, not from invasion, yet, but from weakness within. Pause once more. You stand in the forbidden city at night. The roofs glow faintly in moonlight. The walls rise silent. The gates stand closed. From within, you imagine the glow of a pipe, the curl of smoke, the hush of silence. The emperor sits within, brush in hand. But the silence breathes heavier than his words, and you are left with a reflection that drifts softly, like smoke above golden tiles, when even the emperor's own court inhaled, when his throne itself was shrouded in haze. How could his edicts hold against the storm that gathered beyond the palace walls? Asterisk, you hear the sea before you see it, waves rolling against stone, ropes creaking against wooden hulls, gulls calling faintly in fog. Along the southern coast of China, harbors once filled only with junks and fishing boats now groan beneath the weight of foreign ships. Their sails rise like cliffs, their flags ripple in the wind, their cannons glint faintly in gray light. The tide is not only of water, but of power, foreign power, carried in timbers and iron, pressing closer. With each year, pause here. Imagine yourself standing on the quay at Canton. The morning mist is thick, muffling sound, but as it thins, you glimpse the dark outlines of foreign vessels anchored in the river. Their decks bristle with cannon, their crews move briskly, their voices foreign but firm. They come not as visitors, not as traders alone, but as tide, steady, insistent. Unyielding. Opium had hollowed China from within, but it was the foreign demand, the foreign insistence, that turned a weakness into a wound. British merchants, hungry for tea, silk, and porcelain, had grown impatient with silver flowing steadily out of their hands. And so, they brought opium. Instead, harvested from fields in India, pressed into chests, carried in holds across seas. Profit grew like flame. By the time the Qing court realized the scale, the tide was unstoppable. And so, the harbors filled with smoke, not from incense, not from fires, but from pipes glowing in every corner. Silver drained from the empire, filling the vaults of foreign traders. The wealth of China flowed outward as surely as rivers to the sea. Pause again. Picture a small boat slipping alongside a great ship at night. Its lantern is hooded, its oars silent. Men lift chests from the hold, lower them into the boat, cover them with tarps. The river laps softly. The fog folds close. The transaction passes unseen. By dawn, the chests will be in warehouses. By evening, in markets. By night, in pipes. The empire's strength carried away in silence. The court knew. Edicts thundered. Bans declared. But bans without strength are whispers in wind, and foreign merchants did not listen. Their chests continued to flow ashore, guarded by bribes, protected by corruption. They came with ships that could not be ignored, with cannons that gleamed in fog, with patience born of profit. If you're still listening, notice how the tide itself feels slower now. It's rolling, steady, mist folding heavy, time stretching like water against stone. You don't have to hold every treaty, every port, every name. Let them drift past like ships vanishing in fog. In 1839, the emperor made one last effort to resist. He sent Commissioner Lin Zexu to Canton, a man of iron discipline, a scholar of Confucian strength. Lin banned the trade fiercely, punished corrupt officials, and demanded foreign merchants surrender their opium. He spoke not in whispers, but in thunder, writing to Britain's queen herself, demanding an end to poison. Pause once more. Imagine Lin standing at the harbor, scroll in hand, voice steady. Behind him, soldiers lined the shore, their armor gleaming. Faintly, before him, chests of opium pile high, seized from foreign merchants. With a signal, workers break them open, pour their contents into the sea. The water darkens, the smell thickens, the tide carries it away. Smoke meant for pipes dissolves into waves. The crowd watches in silence. The commissioner stands firm. And for a moment, the empire breathes in defiance. But the tide does not turn so easily. Britain, insulted, demanded compensation. When none came, its warships moved closer, their cannons loaded, their crews ready. The First Opium War had begun, not in sudden fury, but in steady insistence, like waves pressing against stone until it cracks. The Chinese armies were many, but their weapons were old. Swords against rifles, junks against steamships, fire, arrows against cannon. Courage was not enough against iron. City after city fell, rivers filled with foreign sails. The coast bristled with ships. The empire, hollowed by smoke, could not stand steady against the tide. Pause again. Picture a battle along the Pearl River. Fog curls low, the river churns, cannon thunder shakes the air. Chinese junks burn, their sails collapsing, their crews shouting. British ships glide steadily, their guns flashing, their timbers unbroken. Smoke rises, mingling with fog, until sky and water blur into one gray mass. The river echoes with silence after cannon fade, and in that silence, the empire steps backward. If you're still listening, notice how heavy the silence feels after each cannon's roar, how slowly the fog folds back over water, how time lingers between each sound. You don't need to recall each fort, each ship, just let the rhythm of the tide carry you, steady and unbroken. The war ended with treaties written not in China's favor. Ports forced open, silver demanded, foreign merchants given rights beyond the emperor's law. Hong Kong was ceded, harbors opened, trade expanded. What had been forbidden became enforced. What had been resisted became unavoidable. The empire's strength, once unquestioned, was now bent by foreign hands. And so, the tide rolled inward. Opium flowed heavier than before. Foreign merchants walked freely in Chinese streets. Warships anchored where they pleased. The empire's gates, once guarded by red walls and edicts, now stood open, forced by cannon and treaty alike. Pause once more. Imagine yourself standing at Canton's harbor again, years after the war. The mist is the same. The gulls still call. The ropes still creak. But now, foreign ships line the river openly, their flags bright, their cannons visible. Merchants walk ashore freely, their chests unloaded in daylight. The smell of smoke drifts heavier, the silence deeper. The empire breathes out slowly, its strength thinned, its foundations shaken, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like fog across the river. Was it the cannon that broke the empire, or the silence that had already hollowed it, leaving it unready when the foreign tide arrived? Asterisk, the cannons quieted, but the silence that followed was heavier still. The warships had not vanished. They remained in harbors, their masts like forests, their flags bright against the mist. 8. Lost, not only in battle, but in balance. The treaties that followed were not born of harmony, but of humiliation. Words pressed onto paper with ink that bound the empire's hands as surely as chains. Pause here. Imagine the scene of negotiation. Chinese envoy sits stiffly, his robes heavy, his eyes lowered. Across from him, foreign officials lean forward, their uniforms sharp, their pens ready. Outside, the harbor is lined with ships, their cannons silent but visible, their presence louder than any word. The envoy listens, nods, signs. His brush scratches across parchment. The ink spreads slowly, blotting deeper into paper, sealing terms that the empire cannot resist. The Treaty of Nanking. In 1842 ended the First Opium War. Its terms were harsh. China ceded Hong Kong to Britain, opened 5 ports to foreign merchants, paid heavy indemnities in silver, and granted foreign subjects rights outside Chinese law. The empire, once the Middle Kingdom, center of the world, now bent 2 powers from beyond its seas, and so the door once closed was forced open. Merchants now walked freely in Canton, Shanghai, Ningbo, Fuzhou, and Xiamen. Warehouses rose, foreign flags fluttered, smoke drifted heavier. Where once opium slipped through shadows, now it flowed openly, guarded by treaty, protected by cannon. Pause again. Picture the port of Shanghai in the years after. Lanterns glow along the bund, but foreign buildings rise beside Chinese streets. They're brick heavy, their windows tall. Ships line the river, their flags bright in the fog. Merchants speak in foreign tongues, their laughter carrying across the quay. And in back alleys, pipes glow, smoke curls, silence deepens. The city breathes to rhythms now, one of commerce and treaty, one of smoke and silence. If you're still listening, notice how time stretches between each image. Ships anchored, pens scratching, smoke drifting. You don't have to remember each article, each clause. Let them pass like waves against stone, steady and unbroken. The treaties did not end the trade, they enlarged it. More ships arrived, more merchants settled, more silver drained. Other foreign powers, watching Britain's success, demanded their own terms. The United States, France, and others pressed for treaties as well, each one prying doors wider, each one cutting deeper into sovereignty. What had begun as one defeat multiplied into many. The people felt it most. Farmers who once grew rice now saw fields turn to poppy. Merchants who once traded silk found themselves pressed to carry resin instead. Families who once saved silver saw it flow outward. Coins melted, wealth drained. The empire's strength slipped quietly through harbors, carried not only in smoke, but in silver packed into chests and loaded onto ships bound west. Pause once more. Imagine a chest opened in a counting house. Silver coins clink, stacked neatly, their surfaces dull in lamplight. The chest is filled, the lid closed, the lock sealed. Outside, men carry it down to the quay, load it aboard a waiting ship. Da. Tide rises, the ship departs, the silver is gone. Behind, a family eats thin porridge. A soldier fights with a rusted blade. A farmer's field lies fallow. The sound of coins is louder than the silence they leave behind. The empire's humiliation deepened. Not only were ports forced open, but foreign subjects were exempt from Chinese law. If a merchant committed a crime, he was judged by his own officials, not the emperor's court. The Chinese law, once absolute within its borders, now bent around. Foreign presence. The Middle Kingdom's order was fractured, its authority hollowed, and so the treaties pressed heavier than the cannons. Battles may end, but treaties linger. They shaped daily life, reshaped harbors, reshaped trust. Each one deepened silence, each one widened weakness. Pause again. Picture a Chinese official walking through Shanghai's new foreign quarter. Streets are straight, buildings tall, flags bright. He walks stiffly, his robe brushing stone, his eyes lowered. Around him, foreigners stride freely, their voices loud, their presence unchallenged. He says nothing. He walks on. The silence deepens. If you're still listening, notice how slowly the city breathes now. The flags flutter, the smoke drifts, the silence stretches. You don't have to hold each treaty's name. Just let the rhythm linger, soft as fog. For the British profit grew beyond measure. Chests of opium flowed out. Silver flowed in. Ports filled with goods. Their merchants built homes along their bund. Their ships anchored proudly in Chinese rivers. Their cannons resting but visible. They knew the empire was bound bound by treaty, bound by dependence, bound by silence. For the Chinese, despair deepened. Farmers grew poorer, soldiers weaker, officials more corrupt. Smoke-filled homes, silver drained away, dignity thinned. The empire's spirit, once proud, sagged under the weight of humiliation. Its people felt it in daily life, in fewer meals, in weaker clothes, in silence heavier than hunger. Pause once more. Imagine a winter night in a Chinese village. Families huddle around small fires, their meals thin, their blankets patched. In one corner, a man reclines with a pipe, smoke curling above him. His children watch, their stomachs empty, their eyes wide. Outside, the wind howls, the snow falls, the silence deepens. The empire's treaties, signed far away, are felt here most in hunger, in smoke, in silence. And you are left with a reflection that drifts like fog across the river. Was it the ink on treaties, or the silence in homes? Teas that weighed heavier on the empire's breath, the cannon's roar that forced surrender, or the hiss of pipes that ensured surrender would never truly end. Asterisk, the first war ended with silence, but silence in an empire, hollowed by smoke, is never steady. Beneath the quiet of treaties, unrest stirred. Farmers murmured in hunger, soldiers grumbled in weakness, scholars whispered of decline, and foreign ships did not leave. They lingered, anchored in harbors, their cannons polished, their flags bright against mist. The tide had not receded. It was only gathering again. Pause here. Imagine yourself standing at the harbor of Cantoneers after the First War. The mist is familiar. The ropes creak as before. Gulls cry faintly. But now the river bristles with masts. Not only British, but French and American too. Their ships rise tall, their presence unyielding. Onshore, warehouses expand. Merchants stride openly. Pipes glow in every tea house. The empire breathes slower, its silence heavier. The first treaties had opened doors, but foreign powers were never satisfied. They wanted more ports, more rights, more silver, more trade. And so, in 1856, a small dispute became the spark. A Chinese vessel, suspected of piracy, was boarded by Qing officials. Among its crew were men claimed as subjects of Britain. The British protested, demanded apology, demanded rights confirmed. When apology did not come, their warships moved again. The Second Opium War began, not with thunder, but with insistence, another tide pressing inward. And so, cannon thundered. Once more, rivers shook with battle. This time, French ships joined British, their sails side by side, their guns roaring together. Chinese armies, still brave, but still poorly armed, fell back again and again. Ports crumbled, junks burned, rivers filled with smoke. The tide pressed inland, not only along coast, but up the great rivers, toward the heart of the empire. Pause again. Picture a fort along the Pearl River. Its walls rise from stone, its flags flap weakly in wind. Its Chinese soldiers lie in its ramparts, their bows drawn, their cannon old, their voices trembling. Across the water, British and French ships glide steadily, their guns gleaming. The orders given, cannon thunder, the walls shatter, smoke rises, men fall. Silence returns heavier than before. If you're still listening, notice how the rhythm slows again. The thunder fades, the fog folds, the silence lingers. You don't need to remember each battle, each name. Let them drift past like echoes in mist. The war pressed further north, to Tianjin, to Beijing itself. Foreign troops marched inland, their bayonets bright, their rifles sharp. Villages burned. Along the path, rivers choked with debris, silence broken only by the tramp of boots. By 1860, foreign armies reached the very gates of the capital. The empire's heart, once untouchable, now felt the foreign tide at its walls. Pause once more. Imagine Beijing in that autumn. The air is cold, the sky gray, the city tense. Within the forbidden city, the emperor and his court whisper anxiously, their breath clouding and chill. Outside, foreign armies march steadily, their drums beating, their banners high. The silence of the empire collides with the sound of boots. In desperation, negotiations began. The foreign demands were sharp. More ports, more rights, more silver, more trade. When negotiations faltered, the tide turned violent again. British and French troops stormed the summer palace, the Yuan Menu, a wonder of gardens, halls, and treasures. They looted it, then set it aflame. Flames roared, where silence once reigned. Gold melted, books burned, gardens turned to ash. The empire's pride, centuries in the making, was reduced to smoke. Pause again. Picture the summer palace at night. Lanterns still glow along its paths. Trees rustle faintly in wind. Then flames rise, devouring halls, leaping across roofs, consuming paintings, scrolls, jade. Smoke billows into sky, mingling with mist, blotting stars. Soldiers shout, horses stamp, treasures vanish into sacks. By dawn, only ashes remain, the silence heavier than before. If you're still listening, notice how the fire fades into silence, how time stretches between each image. You don't need to hold every treasure's name, every hall's title. Let them drift away like embers into night. The war ended with treaties again, harsher, deeper, more humiliating. The treaties of Tianjin and the Convention of Peking forced more ports open, legalized the opium trade outright, ceded more land, demanded more silver. Missionaries were granted free passage. Foreign envoys stationed in Beijing itself, but had been resisted in the First War, was now enforced in the Second. The empire's sovereignty was fractured further, its pride shattered, its silence unbroken. And so, opium, once a shadow slipping through harbors, now strode openly through cities, straight legalized, its smoke unavoidable. The emperor could forbid no longer. His words had been silenced by treaties, his throne shadowed by foreign flags. The empire itself inhaled, exhaled, but not on its own terms. Pause once more. Imagine Shanghai in the years after. Streets bustle with trade, but half the signs are foreign, half the buildings foreign built. Merchants move in foreign carriages, soldiers guard foreign warehouses. Chinese pass silently, their robes brushing stone, their eyes lowered, cane alleys. Pipes glow, smoke curls, silence deepens. The city breathes a rhythm no longer its own. If you're still listening, notice how steady the tide feels now. Treaties following wars, wars following treaties, silence following both. You don't have to trace every line of every agreement. Just let the rhythm linger, like waves that return always, again and again. The Second Opium War left scars deeper than the first. Not only in territory lost, silver drained, or loss bent, but in dignity burned away. The looting of the summer palace was remembered as humiliation beyond battle, a symbol of helplessness. The Middle Kingdom, once the center of the world, was now bent by forces it could neither resist nor command. Pause again. Picture an elder telling this story to children in a dim room. His voice is low, his eyes heavy. He speaks of gardens burned, treasures lost, dignity stolen. The children listen, their breath visible in cold air, their eyes wide. Outside, snow falls silently, but inside, the silence is heavier still, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like smoke across ruined gardens. Was it the cannon's roar, or the silence of the empire's own breath that allowed the tide to press so deep? Wars fought on rivers, treaties signed in shame, fires that left ashes where harmony once stood. Asterisk, The wars had ended, the treaties signed, the cannons quieted. But silence after fire is not peace. It is only the sound of quiet. Of quiet. It is only the sound of quiet. A deeper wound. Across China, the smoke of opium no longer crept in shadows. It lingered openly now, drifting from alleys, curling from doorways, rising from pipes in villages and cities alike. The empire still stood, its walls unbroken, its palaces intact. But within homes, within markets, within lives, cracks widened. Cracks not of stone, but of spirit. Pause here. Imagine yourself stepping into a narrow street in a provincial town. The afternoon is gray, the sky pale, the ground damp with last night's rain. Shops line the road, their shutters open, their goods displayed. You hear the clang of metal from a blacksmith, the call of a hawker selling vegetables, the chatter of children chasing each other, and then you hear another sound, a soft hiss, the exhale of smoke. From a doorway, a faint sweetness drifts. You glance in and see a man reclined, his pipe glowing, his eyes heavy. Around him, the world moves, but within him, silence grows. Opium had become a habit, not only of merchants and courtiers, but of farmers, laborers, soldiers, even mothers and fathers. Where once it had been hidden, now it was ordinary. Its pipes lay on mats, in kitchens, in pockets. Its resin was measured not in rare drops, but in daily bowls. The smoke did not shock, it simply was, and so families felt it most. Breadth of fields was lost as men smoked instead of plowing. Its children went hungry as coins bought resin instead of rice. Mothers wept as sons sank deeper into haze. Houses still stood, but their hearts burned lower, their silence heavier. Pause again. Picture a home in the countryside. Its roof is patched with straw, its walls lean inward. Inside, a mother stirs thin porridge, her face lined, her hands trembling. In the corner, the father reclines, his pipe glowing faintly, smoke curling above him. The children watch, their stomachs empty, their eyes wide. The porridge simmers, the pipe hisses, the silence grows. If you're still listening, notice how slowly the room breathes. The steam rising, the smoke curling, the silence pressing. You don't need to remember each family's name, each village's place. Let the image drift like mist over fields. The poor bore the heaviest weight. For them, opium was escape from hunger, from cold, from labor unending. A pipe dulled pain, softened emptiness, stretched time, but its relief came with cost. Work left undone, meals left uneaten, silver drained. Families sank deeper into poverty, their resilience frayed, their silence heavier. Markets changed too, where once stalls brammed with cloth, grain, or tools. Now, many sold pipes, resin, trays. Blacksmiths crafted not only plows, but metal fittings for bowls. Potters shaped not only jars, but clay for pipes. Merchants carried not only rice, but resin. The economy itself bent toward smoke. Pause once more. Imagine a market square at dusk. Lanterns glow faintly, stalls still open. One sells grain, another cloth, another pipes stacked neatly, their bowls shining in lamplight. Can gather coins, exchange, pipes lit, smoke drifting upward. Children run past, their laughter thin, their eyes catching on the glow. Square breathes to rhythms, one of trade, one of silence. The government saw the cracks widening. Officials wrote reports of villages weakened, fields unplowed, soldiers frail. Yet those same officials often smoked themselves. Edicts repeated, punishments declared, but enforcement faltered. The haze was too steady, too widespread, too profitable. The empire could not forbid what it itself inhaled, and so its cracks deepened. Poverty grew sharper, crime more common, hunger more frequent. Families borrowed and sold possessions to feed their pipes. Farmers, abandoned land. Soldiers, deserted posts. Communities, weakened, their strength drained not by famine alone, but by choice, by smoke, chosen again and again, until choice itself seemed absent. Pause again. Picture a soldier at a village and his armor is worn, his boots muddy. He sets his sword aside, takes a pipe instead, leans back. Smoke curls upward, his eyes heavy, his breath slow. Outside, the wind howls, the village creaks in frost. Sword waits, but the silence holds him still. If you're still listening, notice how long the silence stretches now. The hiss of the pipe, the drift of smoke, the pause between each breath. You don't need to recall each law, each report. Let them pass like waves fading into shore. The empire was cracking, but the cracks were quiet. No battle announced them, no famine declared them. They showed in children thinner than before, in fields less plowed, in markets more silent, in homes where laughter faded. It was not collapse in thunder, but in whispers. Pause once more. Imagine walking through a village at night. Its houses stand dark, their windows shuttered. It's from one. You see a faint glow, smell sweetness in the air. Inside, a man smokes, his family, silent around him. Another house, the same. Another, the same. The street is quiet, the stars faint, the silence heavy. The empire breathes slowly, its cracks widening in shadow, and you're left with a reflection that drifts softly, like smoke above rooftops. Was it war that weakened the empire most? Or was it the silence of homes, the haze in villages, the cracks spreading not through walls, but through lives themselves? A quote, asterisk. The haze of opium no longer belonged only to homes or to palaces. By the mid-19th century, it had built its own spaces, places where smoke was not hidden but expected, where silence was not accidental but designed. Across cities and towns, opium dens multiplied, their doors marked quietly, their lamps glowing dim, their air heavy, before one even stepped inside. Pause here. Imagine yourself walking down a narrow street in Canton at dusk. Lanterns sway above, their light softened by fog. The cries of vendors fade as shutters close, but one doorway remains open, its threshold low, its lamp faint. You step closer and smell it. Sweetness thicker than incense, smoke that clings to wood, to cloth, to air. Inside, mats line the floor, pipes rest ready, bowls glow faintly. Men recline, their breath slow, their eyes heavy. The silence is deep, broken only by coughs and the hiss of burning resin. These dens became gathering places of a different kind, not for laughter, not for trade, not for ritual, but for silence, shared. Men lay side by side, each alone in haze, yet bound together by stillness. Coins clinked, pipes passed, smoke curled, hours drifted, nights dissolved. Outside, the city moved. Inside, time slowed, and so, opium shaped the rhythm of urban life. Work delayed until smoke was had. Debts paid, not in rice, but in resin. Friendships measured, not in loyalty, but in shared pipes. The dens did not roar with music or chatter. They whispered with stillness. Pause again. Picture a room lit by oil, lamps. Mats stretch across the floor, each occupied by men reclined, their heads resting on small blocks of wood. Pipes glow faintly, bowls hiss, smoke curls upward, clinging to beams blackened over years. An attendant moves quietly, refilling lamps, cleaning bowls, fetching resin. Coins pass from hand to hand, but voices are rare. The silence folds heavier than the smoke itself. If you're still listening, notice how slowly the den breathes, the glow of pipes, the curl of smoke, the pause between each cough. You don't need to remember each detail of commerce. Just let the image linger like haze. Corruption entwined itself with these dens. Officials who should have closed them instead collected bribes to keep them open. Soldiers who should have raided them instead reclined on mats within. Merchants who should have traded food or cloth grew wealthy selling resin. The law bent not once, but daily, until it no longer stood at all. And so, the empire's order thinned. Its laws were written, but its breath was smoke. Its punishments declared, but its hands were open for coin. Its soldiers sworn, but their swords rested as they inhaled. Each den was not only a house of smoke, but a mark of authority, weakened, of trust eroded, of silence chosen over strength. Pause once more. Imagine an official leaving such a den at dawn. His robe is rumpled, his eyes red, his step unsteady. Outside, the streets are waking. Merchants open stalls. Children chase one another. Bells ring from temples. But the official walks past in silence, his duties postponed, his loyalty bent. The city breathes its rhythm, but he does not join it. The poor saw dens as refuge. For them, it was escape from hunger, from cold, from labor unending. A pipe could soften a day's pain, turn silence into dream, but its relief chained them deeper. Coins meant for food vanished into bowls. Hours meant for work dissolved into mats. Strength meant for family ebbed into smoke. Poverty grew heavier, debt thicker, silence deeper. The wealthy sought dens too, though theirs were finer. Carpets replaced mats, silk robes replaced patched cloth. Music sometimes drifted softly from strings in the corner, but the silence was the same. A merchant reclined, as still as a farmer, a scholar as heavy-eyed as a soldier. The haze cared nothing for wealth. It dulled all equally, softened all equally, hollowed all equally. Pause again. Picture a den for the wealthy. The walls are hung with silk, the lamps polished bright. Attendants move gracefully, filling pipes, pouring tea. Ket, the men reclined within are the same, their eyes heavy, their breath slow, their silence deep. The wealth glitters, but the haze is the same. If you're still listening, notice how the image slows further, okay? Silk and patched cloth blur, mats and carpets fade. The silence folds over both. You don't need to separate the classes. Let the smoke merge them as it once did. The dens multiplied. Not only in great cities, but in towns, in villages, even along roadsides. Travelers stopped to smoke. Soldiers delayed to smoke. Officials paused to smoke. The empire's strength dissolved not in one place, but in countless small chambers where smoke replaced duty. And so, the cracks widened. Trust between ruler and subject, father and son, master and servant, grew thin. Hunger deepened, debts mounted, fields lay untended. Crime grew sharper, theft more common, promises less steady. Families fell into silence, communities frayed. The empire itself bent further toward collapse. Pause once more. Imagine a child entering a den to find his father. The lamps glowed dim, the air thick, the mats lined with still figures. He walks between them, searching, coughing, eyes watering. At last he finds the man, pipe at his lips, eyes half closed. He calls softly. The man stirs, nods faintly, returns to smoke. The child stands in silence, then leaves. Outside, the street bustles, faintly, but within, the haze lingers, and you're left with a reflection that drifts like smoke along. Beams darkened by years. Was it the foreign wars that cracked the empire most? Or was it these rooms, small, silent, endless, where men lay still, where duty dissolved, where silence replaced strength? Asterisk, the smoke of opium was not confined to dens or to homes, seeped into the very fabric of society, threading itself through families, communities, villages, and cities. What had once bound people together, duty, trust, resilience, grew. Then, frayed by haze, the empire's walls still stood, its palaces still gleamed, but its people no longer held one another as firmly. The silence of pipes echoed louder than the rhythm of tradition. Pause here. Imagine a wedding in a village hall. Lanterns hang from rafters. Drums beat faintly. Families gather. Food is laid out in bowls. But in the corner, men recline with pipes, their eyes heavy, their voices slowed. The bride glances nervously. The groom lowers his gaze. The drums continue. The lanterns glow. But the silence of smoke weighs heavier than celebration. Opium changed the rhythm of family life. Fathers who once worked in fields leaned too long on mats. Mothers who once guided homes sold possessions to buy resin. Children who once followed parents in labor watched them sink instead into haze. Sons grew bitter, daughters frightened, elders helpless. The bonds of trust stretched thin. The family, the smallest empire of all, cracked down, and so arguments deepened. Debts grew. Marriages faltered. The silence of smoke became louder than voices of care. Families that once survived famine and flood together now struggled against haze alone. Pause again. Picture a family at dusk. The fire glows faintly. A pot of rice simmers thin. The children eat quietly, their eyes lowered. In the corner, the father smokes, his body still, his breath heavy. The mother stares at the fire, her hands folded in her lap. No words are spoken. The rice is finished. The pipe glows again. The silence lingers. If you're still listening, notice how slowly the room breathes. The hiss of the pipe, the crackle of the fire, the pause between each sigh. You don't need to recall each family's name. Let the silence carry you. Communities, frayed as well. Villages, once bound by shared work, shared rituals, shared resilience, now bent beneath the haze. Farmers abandoned fields, neighbors quarreled over debts, festivals lost their joy. The smoke dulled not only individuals, but the bonds between them. Markets shifted too. Where once stalls bustled with grain, fish, cloth, now more sold resin, pipes, trays. Children grew up watching pipes passed as commonly as bowls of tea. The silence of smoke became the rhythm of the square. Pause once more. Imagine walking through a town market at noon. Stalls stand open, voices rise, goods displayed. But at the edges, pipes glow. Men sit together, silent, smoke curling above. Coins clink, bowls hiss, time drifts. The market moves, but its heart slows. Corruption spread further. Officials who should have guided their people instead smoked with them. Soldiers who should have defended towns instead deserted for dens. Judges who should have kept order instead took bribes. Authority weakened. Trust dissolved. The empire's spine bent not from battle, but from silence. And so, rebellions brewed, not only from hunger, not only from injustice, but from despair. Communities hollowed by haze no longer trusted their rulers, no longer trusted themselves. Rebellion became as steady as smoke, another sign of cracks spreading. Pause again. Picture a village gathering at night. Elders sit, discussing famine, tax, duty. Their voices rise, but their eyes are heavy. Their pipes glow faintly. Younger men stand restless, their arms crossed, their voices sharp. The elders cough, sigh, nod. The meeting dissolves into silence. Outside, stars fade behind haze. The night grows heavier. If you're still listening, notice how the silence folds longer now. Voices blur, decisions drift, time slows. You don't have to recall each rebellion's name, each leader's cry. Let them dissolve like mist at dawn, at dawn. Even in cities, trust fractured. Merchants cheated customers to afford resin. Apprentices stole from masters. Kana, servants, betrayed employers. Families pawned heirlooms. Kana became rhythm. Theft became habit. Not in great bursts, but in endless, small acts repeated daily until honesty itself felt thin. And so, society bent. Neighbors no longer trusted one another. Families no longer trusted fathers. Subjects no longer trusted officials. The empire no longer trusted itself. Pause once more. Imagine walking down a city street at night. Lanterns glow faintly. Shadows stretch along walls. Man slips from a doorway. Coins clinking in his hand. Behind him, a shopkeeper stares at an empty shelf, his shoulders slumped. The man vanishes into a den. The shopkeeper closes his stall. The street grows silent. Opium did not roar like cannon, did not strike like famine, did not sweep like plague. It whispered, it dulled, it hollowed. It frayed the threads that held people together until they no longer bound. The empire's strength dissolved, not in one great collapse, but in countless small silences repeated daily. Pause again. Picture yourself standing in the middle of a village square. Lanterns glow, smoke curls, silence lingers round you. Homes stand, fields stretch, walls rise. Everything looks intact, yet you feel it. The cracks beneath, the bonds stretched thin, the silence heavier than stone, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like haze across rooftops. Was it armies at the gate, silence in the square, that truly broke the empire? When families no longer trusted, when neighbors no longer cared, when smoke replaced duty and silence replaced strength. Asterisk. The wars had ended, the treaties signed, the palaces looted, the fields abandoned. And yet, long after cannon quieted, long after flags were lowered, the smoke of opium lingered. It did not leave with foreign ships. It did not vanish with signatures. On paper, it remained, curling in alleys, heavy in homes, thick in dens. It was not only a trade or a habit anymore. It was a shadow, a presence that clung to the empire's breath. Pause here. Imagine a village many years after the Second Opium War. The fields lie dry. The huts patched with straw, the wells half empty. A boy runs barefoot, chasing a hoop of wood, his laughter sharp in cold air. But as he passes one house, he slows. Inside, his father lies back, a pipe at his lips, smoke curling upward. The boy watches a moment, then moves on. His laughter fades. The silence lingers. Opium had become inheritance. Not in wealth, not in honor, but in habit. Children grew in homes where pipes glowed as often as candles, where smoke was as steady as steam from rice. They learned not only duty, but silence. Fathers passed it to sons, neighbors to neighbors, merchants to apprentices. What began as trade had become culture. What began as leisure had become life. And so, the empire, though weakened by treaties, though bent by foreign powers, found itself most hollowed by what it had inhaled itself. The wars had ended, but the shadow remained. Pause again. Picture a city street at dusk. The markets close, the lamps glow, the air smells of cooked rice and burning oil. But through it drifts another smell, sweet, heavy, unmistakable. You follow it to a doorway, glance in, and see rows of mats, rows of men, smoke rising like fog inside. The city moves, but within time does not. If you're still listening, notice how the rhythm slows here. Lamps glowing, smoke drifting, silence folding. You don't need to recall each treaty, each port. Let them pass like shadows fading. In lamplight, the Qing dynasty staggered into the late 19th century, not only with foreign powers pressing, but with its own people dulled. Rebellions flared, some against foreigners, some against rulers, some against hunger itself. Yet armies sent to fight were often weakened before battle. Their soldiers slowed, their resolves softened. Leaders who sought reform found their officials. slow to act, their clerks distracted, their silver drained. The empire's voice cracked when it most needed to rise. And so, opium became more than habit. It became a symbol. To its people, it was despair and escape. To its rulers, it was failure and shame. To foreign powers, it was profit and leverage. Each puff of smoke was more than personal. It was political, cultural, imperial. Pause once more. Imagine an elder, sitting by a hearth, telling children of past glories, of emperors who ruled vast lands, of armies that marched proud, of palaces that gleamed with gold. His voice is steady, but as he speaks, he coughs. He leans back, lifts a pipe, inhales. The children listen in silence. The stories fade into smoke. The shadow of opium was not measured only in addiction. It was measured in silver, drained, in dignity lost, in pride shattered. It was remembered in gardens burned, in treaties forced, in humiliation endured. It became part of memory, part of identity, part of a wound that never closed. If you're still listening, notice how heavy memory feels, thicker than smoke, slower than haze, lingering longer than silence. You don't have to follow each name, state. Let them drift like echoes in night. Foreign merchants grew richer, their nations stronger. But China remembered. The century of humiliation, as it would later be called, began with the shadow of opium. Every treaty signed, every territory ceded, every port forced open was tied to it. It was not only poison of the body, but poison of the empire's trust. Pause again. Picture the harbor of Hong Kong in the decades after. The city bustles. Ships arrive from across seas. Warehouses brim with goods. Foreign flags flutter. Foreign soldiers march. Foreign merchants laugh. Okay? And behind them, smoke drifts. Silver flows. Silence deepens. The city grows, but the empire thins. And you are left with a reflection that drifts softly, like mist across ruined gardens. Wars may end, treaties may expire, palaces may fall, but when a people inhale silence for generations, how long does the shadow linger, and how deeply does it shape what remains? Asterisk. The wars were finished, the treaties signed, the palaces burned, the harbors opened, and yet, in the decades that followed, the shadow of opium did not recede. Akeem, it curled through China, not only as a substance, not only as habit, but as memory. Generations inhaled its sweetness, exhaled its silence, and passed both to the next. The empire's wounds were not merely political. They were remembered in breath, in stories, in silence itself. Pause. Here. Imagine an old man sitting beneath a willow tree beside a river. The afternoon is hazy, the water still, the leaves whispering in faint wind. Children gather around him, curious. He tells them of days when their village was fuller, when fields were greener, when granaries held more grain. His voice is steady at first, but soon he coughs, leans back, draws from a pipe. The children watch as smoke drifts upward, blurring his words, softening his story. They nod, but they do not laugh. A silence folds between them. Opium became a language of despair. A farmer, too poor to buy rice, bought resin instead. A soldier, too weary to march, sought haze instead. A father, too broken to provide, reclined in silence instead. Families told themselves it dulled hunger, softened grief, soothed sorrow, and it did. But it also passed on the memory of helplessness. And so, opium was remembered not only as relief, but as failure. Children who grew in homes heavy with smoke did not forget the sound of the hiss, the smell of the sweetness, the weight of the silence. Even if they did not smoke, they carried the memory of what it had done to their parents, to their homes, to their empire. Pause again. Picture a woman in a crowded tenement. Her husband lies still, pipe at his lips. Her children sleep on mats, their breathing shallow, She stares at a wall, darkened with soot, her eyes unblinking. She does not speak. Outside, footsteps echo faintly, but inside, the silence is unbroken. The children will grow, and they will remember not words, but silence. If you're still listening, notice how the silence lingers longer now, heavier than smoke, slower than time. You don't have to recall each name, each rebellion, each treaty. Let them fade like echoes in mist. The empire staggered into the late 19th century with its people still burdened. Foreign merchants continued their trade. Foreign soldiers guarded their rights. Foreign flags flew over ceded lands. China itself seemed powerless, its rulers unable to resist, its people unable to rise. The memory of humiliation pressed heavier, then hunger, heavier than cold. And yet, memory became a seed of something else. The smoke that dulled bodies sharpened resentment. Stories of palaces burned, of silver drained, of families ruined, of soldiers humiliated. These were told again and again. Even as pipes glowed, voices whispered of revenge, of change, of a time when silence might end. Pause once more. Imagine a group of scholars in a dim room, their robes plain, their candles flickering. They talk of history, of duty, of the empire's wounds. One coughs, his eyes heavy, smoke curling above. Yet his voice remains steady. This cannot last forever. The others nod, their faces drawn, their words quiet but firm. The silence is heavy, but within it, something stirs. The shadow of opium was twofold. It dulled life, but it sharpened memory. It hollowed the present, but it carved the past deeper into thought. The empire could not forget what had been taken. Not just silver, not just land, not just dignity, but certainty itself. If you're still listening, notice how memory itself drifts like haze. Sometimes sharp, sometimes blurred, always lingering. You don't need to trace each dynasty, each reform. Let the memory drift like smoke over water in villages. Its children grew bitter at fathers who smoked instead of worked. In cities, youths resented officials who smoked instead of judged. In armies, soldiers mocked commanders who smoked instead of led. Resentment built quietly, as steady as smoke itself. The empire did not collapse in a day, but each day that silence lingered. Its people remembered, and so the echo stretched forward, into rebellions, into reforms, into revolutions. Long after the wars ended, long after the treaties were signed, long after the dynasty itself fell, opium was remembered as a chain, as a humiliation, as a shadow that defined an age. Pause again. Picture yourself walking through Beijing decades later. The dynasty is old now. Its robes faded, its walls cracked. Streets bustle still, but the air is heavier, filled with both smoke and memory. You pass it in, hear coughs, see mats lined with men. You pass a tea house, hear voices low, words sharp with anger. Both are part of the same empire dulled in, body sharpened in memory, bound by silence, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like smoke above rafters. When an empire remembers its wounds in every breath, when silence itself becomes inheritance, can it ever breathe freely again? Or does the shadow linger long after the pipes grow cold? Asterisk. The dynasty staggered, decade after decade, its palaces still standing, its throne still gilded, but its spirit hollowed. The smoke of opium did not end with the treaties, nor with the wars. It lingered into the late 19th century, into the 20th, into memory itself. It became a thread in the fabric of what would later be called the century of humiliation, a span not measured only in years, but in wounds carried forward. Pause here. Imagine the late Qing court. The robes of officials are still embroidered with dragons. The rituals still performed with bows and drums. the throne still gleams in the hall of supreme harmony. Pinned behind the pageantry, silence lingers. Ministers hesitate, armies falter, fields yield less. Foreign flags fly in treaty ports, foreign merchants walk streets with impunity, foreign gunboats rest in rivers. The empire appears whole, but within, cracks stretch wide. Opium remained the clearest symbol of that weakness. It was not just a drug, it was a reminder. Each pipe glowing in a village was a reminder of battles lost, of treaties signed, of silver drained, of dignity bent. Each chest of resin unloaded at a port was a reminder of how the empire's gates had been forced open, how its sovereignty had been fractured, how its silence had been exploited. And so, the memory deepened. It was carried in the bodies of those who smoked, in the hunger of children, in the despair of mothers, in the silence of fathers. It was carried in the stories told of palaces looted, of generals defeated, of treasures burned. It was carried in the bitterness of scholars, in the anger of soldiers, in the hopelessness of peasants. Memory became heavier than smoke itself. Pause again. Picture a scholar writing by lamplight in 1890. His brush moves slowly, his ink spreading across paper. He writes not only of opium's poison, but of China's shame. His words are sharp, though his voice is low. Outside, a den glows faintly. Men recline. Smoke drifts upward. The scholar dips his brush again. Determined, his hand trembles. But he writes on. If you're still listening, notice how memory itself seems to breathe slowly now. Each brush stroke heavy, each pause longer, each silence thicker. You don't have to follow each date, each rebellion. Let them pass like shadows fading into fog. The empire collapsed finally in 1911. The Qing dynasty, weakened by wars, rebellions, corruption, and smoke, gave way to revolution. But even as a republic was declared, the shadow of opium lingered. Foreign powers still held treaty ports. Foreign merchants still traded freely. Foreign armies still marched when they wished. China's sovereignty was fractured, its people still burdened, its memory still heavy. And so, the echo stretched further. Teasy smoked as they fought one another. Teasy smoked as they carried pipes alongside rifles. Teasy smoked into homes where children grew watching parents inhale silence. Even as the world shifted, the shadow of opium did not vanish to pause once more. Imagine a street in Shanghai in the 1920s. Cars now roll beside rickshaws. Neon lights flicker beside lanterns. The city bustles, modern and old at once. But step into an alley, and you still find mats, pipes, smoke. Men recline, their breath slow, their eyes heavy. Outside, the world races forward. Inside, time drifts as slowly as ever. The memory of humiliation became central to identity. It was not just history, but inheritance. The people remembered their empire weakened not only by foreign cannons, but by its own silence. They remembered treasures burned, sovereignty fractured, dignity stolen. They remembered fathers lost to haze, mothers broken by hunger, children silent in corners. If you're still listening, notice how the echo lingers longer than smoke, how memory itself curls and drifts, refusing to vanish. You don't have to hold each empire's fall. Let the memory itself be the weight that carries you in later years. When leaders sought to awaken China, they invoked this memory. They spoke of humiliation, of weakness, of the shadow of opium. They vowed never again to let the nation inhale silence, never again to let its sovereignty be bent, never again to let its dignity be burned. The shadow of opium, once despair, became fuel for resolve. And so, the echo that never faded shaped more than sorrow. Shaped anger, resilience, determination. But it never stopped being a wound. It remained in memory, in language, in culture. The phrase, century of humiliation, carried not only history, but filling a wound that explained. A wound that warned. A wound that defined. Pause again. Picture a classroom in modern China. A teacher stands before students, chalk in hand. On the board, he writes of the Opium Wars, of the treaties, of the burned summer palace. The children listen, their faces solemn. They were not there, their parents were not there, but the memory is alive, carried forward, breathed in. Outside, the city roars with traffic, with growth, with modernity. But inside the classroom, silence lingers as the teacher speaks. And you are left with a reflection that drifts like smoke across centuries when a nation remembers its weakness in every breath. When humiliation itself becomes inheritance, can the echo ever fade? Or does it remain, quiet but unbroken, shaping the rhythm of all that follows? Good night, sweet dreams, dreams.